everybody. This is very, very exciting for me, and it's really a wonderful opportunity to be here at this extraordinary time and place. My name is Megan Furness, and I am a theatre director, playwright, performer, improviser and teacher, and I live in Cape Town in South Africa, and I work predominantly in theatre and also a little bit in film when I can. Just a little bit of my background. I was one of those really, really lucky children. So I was able to start acting and being in plays from a very, very young age. And that was when I fell in love with theatre, and I fell in love with everything that theatre could offer. And that was really, really exciting for me. And so theatre was always part of my growing up. And in fact, I think I probably was in more plays than I ever saw plays. After I finished school, I was privileged to go to the best acting school in South Africa at the University of Cape Town, the University of Cape Town Drama School, and I graduated from there in 1986, which is a really, really long time ago. The reason why that date is important is because historically, it was a very important time. We were still very much in apartheid here in South Africa. And in fact, there were very, very few people of color or black people at drama school at the time that I was there. And because we were at university, we were obviously very, very politically involved in trying to shift this incredibly frightening and terrible system. After graduating from UCT, I spent a lot of time working as an actress and trying to work as an actress, mainly in Johannesburg, before I came back to Cape Town. And I came back to Cape Town in 1993, just before our first democratic elections, and I started my own little improvisation company. At the same time, I started working in the area of work that is going to be the subject of my discussion today, which is industrial theatre. And I've been working in this field ever since. It's one of the things that I do. I'm also a playwright. I've written a range of different plays, and actually written a children's musical called The Terrified Tokolosh. I've written a published play called The Tent, which is really about racism and xenophobia, which is very topical, obviously, in South Africa. I've written a play called Clouds Like Waves, which is an experimental play, because what I've tried to do with that play is I've tried to really keep it open for a director. So it's a series of very, very short scenes between two people and a series of monologues. And the cast can be anything from 3 people to 12 people or even more. And what I've also tried to do is keep it so open that it's open to any gender and also any age. It's a kind of piece of work that I think can be interpreted in many, many, many different ways. And that's very exciting for me and quite thrilling for me. Other things that I am very, very interested in is how theatre can deliver a message, because I believe that the power and beauty of theatre is to change an audience and to make people feel different. So I always love this idea that people will come into a theatrical space, even if it's not a traditional theatrical space, that they'll enter into the space, and after what happens to them, after experiencing a live performance, they leave that space changed. Something has happened to them, either emotionally or psychologically or spiritually. So I'm very interested in how theatre can really effect and affect change. And that's I think that's a really good place for me to before we get to my subject matter, let me also just say that I am also deeply interested in directing theatre, and I had the extraordinary opportunity to direct a wonderful piece of work called Nikabi Ninja, which was a play written by an extraordinary Egyptian born playwright who now lives in Glasgow, about sexual harassment. And this was an incredibly powerful piece, and I love the idea of being able to move between writing for theatre, directing other people's writing for theatre, and even performing other people's writing for theatre. That's very exciting for me. So I think now is probably a good time for me to start talking about this idea of industrial theatre. And before I talk about it more in detail, I would love to say, please leave your questions and your thoughts for the end of my presentation, and then at the end of that we can do a Q&A, and I can hope to answer some of your questions and give you further insights. So if you'd like to leave your questions till the end, then I'll answer them in a proper Q&A session. So I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, what is industrial theatre? What is it? What is this idea of industrial theatre? It seems a very strange marriage of two words, industrial theatre. In South Africa, because of our particular history and because theatre in general has been reserved for a particular class, it's been kind of exclusive. But because South Africa has a big problem with literacy, where a lot of people are not fluent readers, and because we have so many different languages, often what happens with people in the workplace, particularly your blue-collar workers or factory workers or people who are working in some kind of industry, is that they get a lot of material that they don't ever read. A lot of stuff about safety or about productivity or about keeping the workplace clean, or about leadership, or even about social issues like HIV, AIDS awareness, or even diabetes. And what happens with the material is that the material, written material, often gets wasted. And also because we have quite a big poor workforce, they also don't necessarily have access to video or movies or data, which is very expensive in South Africa. So what happens with theatre is theatre becomes a live form of delivering important messages. So industrial theatre is where a company or a factory or even a big business decides that they have an important message that they want to deliver to their workforce, and then they get somebody like me who works in industrial theatre, who specializes in industrial theatre, to find out exactly what it is that they want and exactly what it is that they want to say, and then I create a live theatrical solution for them. So a good example would be a job that we did for South African Ports Authority. They wanted to make sure that all their workers understood that they couldn't come to work at the harbour under the influence of alcohol or drunk, and that there was going to be zero tolerance towards people who had used alcohol or drugs. And so we were asked to come on and to create performances that made people aware of the zero tolerance towards alcohol and drugs. And so we collected a little cast together, and we did a series of 5 little pop-up pieces that could be performed anywhere. On a boat, at the end of a harbor, in a boardroom, in a stairwell, in a parking lot, and wherever there were workers, we would quickly get our performers together, and they would perform this little 5-minute piece that gave this very clear message. What we also decided with this particular project is we decided that we would perform the piece in gibberish, a made-up language, so that we could completely transcend any language barriers that might occur. It was huge fun, and it was incredibly well received. Another kind of industrial theatre project, for example, is where a big petroleum company got hold of me, and they have a huge workforce. In South Africa, we have people who are called petrol pump attendants, and they are the people who put your gas into your car tank. It's a job that happens all over South Africa and not much elsewhere in the world. But this petrol company employed me to create a piece of industrial theatre that would go on a roadshow around the country and perform to huge audiences of petrol pump attendants and cashiers who worked at the gas station shops. And there was a really very exciting opportunity, because this client asked me to make a series of performances that were often 45-minute plays in length, and they were all focused on providing good service and really about how the staff interact with the customer in order to create service excellence. And this was a beautiful relationship that I had with this particular company, because the shows were so successful, and the workforce was so inspired by these pieces of theatre that we had an ongoing relationship, and every year we would do another one, and they would be very different. And people would literally come from around the country to come to these venues to have this show and watch this performance. And it was great because it employed all the best parts of theatre. Sometimes we would even do musicals, or sometimes we would do kind of live talk show or even game show. And the cast was about 5 people strong, and we developed this kind of relationship and reputation with our audience, who absolutely loved us. But there are lots of different forms of industrial theatre. Sometimes you are creating work that is only seen by people on a management level, and then it has a different level of sophistication. Sometimes you really are performing on the factory floor, so in between shifts, there's a little space. One of the topics that's often asked of us is to create industrial theatre for factory workers around HIV and AIDS awareness campaigns. And in fact, one of the last ones that I did took place in a foam production factory, and we performed an awareness piece of industrial theatre that was very charming. It had a talk show host and who interviewed a series of different characters about HIV and AIDS, and she spoke to a health professional. This, of course, is, I wrote the little script and directed the performance. So she spoke to a health professional, she spoke to a live condom, and she spoke to somebody who had been diagnosed with HIV. And what's lovely about industrial theatre is that as long as you have the solid message, you can employ all the theatrical tools to create really great, accessible, entertaining, funny, and moving theatre. So that's really a kind of idea of what industrial theatre is. And the reason why I think it's become really popular in South Africa, obviously not now during lockdown where we can't have audiences and can't interact in that way, is that it's a very powerful and easy way to deliver a message to a group of people who are who don't normally access that kind of information. And because it's such an emotional journey, and because it's so interactive, there's a wonderful opportunity for this work and for its message to be really, really remembered. I think that if you're tapping into people's emotions, and I think that if you're working with humor, and if you're working with live performance and character and song and a certain amount of lightness, a message is remembered much longer, and the power of that message is received much stronger than if it was just in a manual or a handbook. So a couple of the other topics that we've had a look at when we've done industrial theatre and one of the really big ones is about safety at the workplace. Safety is obviously a huge thing when we're talking about industrial theatre, and a very easy way of delivering safety messaging is through live performance, because your workforce, who may be, for example, on a gas refinery or a huge factory floor that builds industrial things, is you have a very wide and very diverse workforce. And if you can communicate a message to them around safety that's easy to remember and something that they will think about, then it's much easier for them to put into practice those messages of safety. So the interesting thing about industrial theatre is, in a country like South Africa, where theatre in general, mainstream theatre and even fringe theatre, of which there is a fair amount, is kind of still quite niche, and it doesn't appeal to or attract an enormous mass audience. So people don't rush to the theatre like they rush to the movies, say, for example, or to other forms of live entertainment like music. Industrial theatre is a great way to get people to experience the magic and the thrill of live performance, and at the same time deliver a very, very clear and strong message. One of the other things about industrial theatre is that it really is talking to an audience who doesn't necessarily experience theatre much. That's people who don't necessarily have access to it, whether it's from a transport point of view or people who don't have access to theatre from a financial point of view. This is really bringing the bones of theatre, the essence of theatre to an audience that doesn't often have access to theatre. So it really does fulfill two really, really clear roles. The first role being that it's message driven, and of course the people who are paying you and the people who are commissioning the work is big business or big companies, and they are the people who are paying for this message to be delivered. But it gives somebody like me a wonderful opportunity to put all my theatrical skills into this creation of this work that then goes out and delivers a message to a wide audience, and gives them an opportunity to experience theatre and to really, really enjoy it. One of the great things, obviously, about doing that kind of work is that you really receive such beautiful feedback. You receive beautiful feedback at the time that you're performing it, but you also receive beautiful feedback afterwards, because it is your client, your boss, who actually ends up seeing the impact of that kind of theatrical work. And that's really fun. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the other and stranger forms of industrial theatre that I've come across over the years. One of the strange jobs that I did, which was a road show, which was for a bank. They wanted their bank tellers and the people who worked in each branch of the bank to understand a little bit better what their financial offerings were, which was hilarious because I didn't understand what those financial offerings were. I didn't really understand the material much at all, but we put together a very funny and very cute industrial theatre job that was then able to also travel around the countryside and go into conference rooms where these people had gathered, and they were having PowerPoint presentations and lectures and information, and then we would also perform this little 15-minute piece of industrial theatre for them to get a better idea of what the product offering was. And it was, again, also very effective, because when you're working in-house like that, and when you're delivering a message in-house like that, really what you're doing is you are speaking the language that this particular group of people know. And so they feel very represented, and they also feel very, very seen. And of course, this again really helps the message to be delivered. Another really fun industrial theatre job I did once was at a very high-powered conference of high management of a big corporation, and what they wanted is that most of their material at their conference was seriously boring. And they wanted to insert little bits of theatre and little bits of lightness and little bits of comedy into their very, very boring 3-day conference. And so what we did is we used industrial theatre and live performance, and we also did it in a kind of TV style theme. I think we did the style of like a TV motorcar show, a little bit like Top Gear, say, for example. And we had a really sort of boisterous and loud kind of style TV host who was the live MC for their conference. And obviously every time he came up, we had other characters that he interacted with, and he interacted with the real people, and he interacted with some actors in order to generate a better understanding of some of that material, and also just to make light of it. And it was so incredibly successful that actually when this character, this sort of talk show host character moved off stage, everyone was always like, oh, can't we rather listen to him? He's much more interesting. And that was also a really, really, really fun one that we did. What the lovely thing is about industrial theatre as well for me is that I am able to work from a pool of actors who are really, really talented and very, very flexible, and also very passionate about what they do. It's different from performing traditional theatre. It feels different. It has a different a different expression, and obviously it's a very, very different audience. So generally how I work is I do audition people, and I do check in with people and find out who's available. I have a strong team of people that I love working with because they're very, very funny, and of course they're very reliable, and they have wonderful interpersonal skills. And over the years, I definitely build up a relationship with a certain amount of people who are really good at working in that kind of way, because it isn't for everybody. There is often a lot of traveling. There's often a lot of interaction, both with client, which is quite formal, and then of course with your audience, which is a little less formal. And it's a very particular kind of work, and it's a very particular kind of way of doing work. Sometimes you'll end up doing an industrial theatre job that is literally a one-off performance for one group of people, and there your actors might move in, perform, and disappear. Those are also huge fun and can be kind of exciting, but they can also be quite daunting, because often what happens is that you have a client or a company that doesn't really understand what live performance entails. So you might, I might send them a list of requests, like for example, please can we have somewhere raised for the actors to perform on, or can we guarantee that there's no machinery running during performance, because otherwise they won't be heard. And oftentimes that can also just not necessarily happen. So it's always a good idea to do a lot of advanced checking that the space is going to be okay, that people are going to be able to see, that people are going to be able to hear, because oftentimes people don't really understand what live performance actually means in the present moment of performance. What I love about industrial theatre, and why I wish it was a little bit more widely used, is because I think it gives actors and industrial theatre writers and directors a real opportunity to understand a non-theatre environment, but still in theatrical terms. So it really makes me feel very much part of a workforce. And oftentimes, not always, sometimes I end up delivering a message that I don't necessarily believe in, but oftentimes I really am delivering a message that I really care about and really believe in. Just before the kind of coronavirus crisis happened here in South Africa, I was busy working on a little piece of industrial theatre specifically to create awareness on I think it was the international, but it might just have been South African, but International TB Day. And we were going to be performing a series of very short monologues about tuberculosis and about the terrible, terrible tragedy of it, and the terrible side effects of it, and how easily it's spread, and how difficult it is to treat. And we were going to be performing to we were going to be performing to sections of our government around TB and the terrible, terrible scourge of TB, which is a huge problem in South Africa. And it was so interesting because we had just started working on it. I'd written the script, and I had managed to source actors who were about to come on board. And then obviously we got news that it had been cancelled, because it would have performed literally the day before our very, very, very rigid lockdown started. So it is a project that I have written and that I do hope still happens one day. hopefully in the future. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus and lockdown, I have been in a situation where a good few projects that were on the cards that might not necessarily have been confirmed, but that were on the cards, have been cancelled. And so really, in terms of industrial theatre, I'm not sure when we'll ever be able to do that again. I certainly don't think it's going to be very soon. I think that's really, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can say that's interesting about industrial theatre, but I think here's a good time for me to also just go from talking about industrial theatre and the amazing opportunities and skills that I've gathered over the years from working in industrial theatre. And one of them is to write script on deadline. It's a little bit challenging, but I will get a brief from a company or somebody who's in charge, and they'll give me a brief. They'll tell me who the audience is, and oftentimes I've literally got to go away, come up with 2 or 3 concepts for them to choose from. Hopefully they like them, and they'll choose one, and then I go away and write the scripts. Then I wait for them to approve the scripts, then I cast the scripts, then we start working and I start directing the script and putting the bits and pieces together, all the while keeping them very, very involved, so that at any point that there's stuff that they don't like or that they don't feel comfortable with, they are able to be part of that process and share with me. So that's what we do. And then the client is invited to a midway rehearsal, and then they are invited to a final dress rehearsal where they see everyone in their costumes, and of course then we take it and put it onto the floor, so to speak. And so it's never surprising for the client. I like the client to always know exactly what it is that they're getting, and that's one of the easy ways of really satisfying them. And that's a little bit different from doing traditional theatre, where you often work kind of in an insular kind of way, and you work privately and get your production together and then have this opening night, and you only really find out how it's going to be received once it's had its first audience. And industrial theatre really works in a softer kind of way, because it's so specific and because it's so message driven. It works in a way to include everyone, just to make sure that you are delivering what it is that they want, which is kind of different from a kind of purely independent artistic venture like putting on a play at a theatre. I think I've managed to hurtle through all of this stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in terms of industrial theatre that I haven't managed to cover. But I think now would be a good idea, if you wanted to, for me to open up a little bit, to open up the conversation a little bit. And you're absolutely welcome in the comments to send me any questions that you may have, or if you've had any kind of time to think about what I've said. I have spoken very fast, I think. You're absolutely welcome to give me some input or ask some questions, or even just share some feedback with me, I guess, about what you've thought about my presentation. I'd love to talk about the tent, Vijay, thank you so much. So in about 2009, I wrote, although I'd written quite a few works before the tent, I wrote my first real full-length proper play called The Tent. And the synopsis is kind of about a white woman and a black woman, an interracial couple who arrive in a tiny, tiny town in South Africa and end up pitching a tent outside one of the gas stations. And it really is about how the people of the village, all the different people of the village, respond to this couple who move into this tent. She's a healer. She works in magical healing. He is a foreign national from Zimbabwe, and the town is divided between people who like them and seek out their help, and people who hate them and want to hurt them. And it really is a very bleak story that tells in tiny, minute detail the absolute tragedy of racism and hatred that is so easy to spread. So that's really about the tent, and it was a published play, and it also was chosen as one of the African plays to be worked at the National Theatre Lab in 2011, and I went there as one of 6 Africans to work on our plays, and that was fantastic. Tushar, you say, sounds like training staff and communicating jargon in a simple, entertaining manner. That's exactly right. It literally is that. It's using theatre to train staff and communicate with staff. And one of the jobs that we did do is that we actually ended up training and working with, in this exact way, with a group of call center operators who generally feel very unseen and feel very hidden away and very underappreciated and quite abused, I think, in their jobs. And so when we performed for them, they suddenly felt like they were being seen, and they felt heard, and they felt like they could really they felt that something beautiful and special had been created for them. Jadav, you ask about the response from the factory workers. Factory workers, what's so lovely about performing for factory workers is that they respond immediately. So if they love something, then they're loud and responsive while you're busy doing it. And they might even try and interact with some of the characters that are being performed. And everybody wants to talk afterwards. So I think that's why it's also so exciting. Tushar asks, how long of a rehearsal time period is generally needed for your productions? And give us insight about budgeting. Those are such great questions. I'm just going to press to see more, and costs involved. So it all depends on the length of the performance and the amount of cast. If I'm doing a 45-minute play, then I really do almost a kind of traditional 2-week rehearsal process. If there's songs and choreography involved, then it'll be longer, 3 weeks. I generally don't work with a cast of more than 6. I try and 6 is my top, and obviously often quite a lot smaller. I'll do a lot of work just with two performers, and maybe even get them to play lots of different characters. But I like to work with a team of 6 and not more. So if I have more characters, then a lot of times they will play different characters. And budgeting is very, very specific. I charge for first of all, I charge for a consultation fee, which is not very little. And then I charge for writing the script, and I charge for casting, directing, costumes, props, and set. And I charge for rehearsal times, and obviously actors' salaries for rehearsals and performances. They do vary. Obviously, they're widely varied depending on the job. What I don't do is I don't include transport costs unless there is a request for me to do that. I usually leave that for, especially if we have to fly or travel far distances, then I normally let the client deal with that, because they've normally got an internal travel agent and someone who can do that. And I also don't do the big side of the setting up the event. So if there needs to be sound, and if there needs to be video, and if there needs to be mic stuff, or staging, building of stage and lights. I don't take care of that. Normally an eventing company will take on that side of things, but oftentimes, especially if they're small industrial theatre jobs, we will totally do without that. So we'll literally perform on the factory floor, and we'll take a box with our little bits and pieces and costumes and props and things that we've chosen to use, and we will literally be very, very, very portable. I hope that answers your question, Tushar. I hope, let me know if it does. Vijay says, what were your thoughts on directing Nikkabi Ninja, and how did you go into the skin of the characters, as it's not an easy character and play to direct? So Nikkabi Ninja was actually a two-hander, and all I did was direct it. It's a very complicated two-hander, Vijay, because it's a character, a young girl who is a university student in Egypt, and the other character is her alter ego, the Nikkabi Ninja. And so it's literally two people, two different actresses who are playing two different sides of the same character, but they actually play it in dialogue. It was brilliant. And of course it was very funny, because when I first read the script, I had all these brilliant ideas of all these amazing things that I was going to need, and I was going to have all this stuff, and I was going to have projections, and I was going to have this complicated set. And the longer I worked with the actresses, who were phenomenal, most phenomenal actresses, I realized that we needed nothing. And we ended up having 2 white chairs, beautiful lighting, and just the 2 actresses. And that was all we needed. And they just did everything themselves. It was a very intimate performance, very deeply, deeply moving, obviously very terrifying and very, very jarring, because it's about sexual harassment in Egypt, and particularly during the spring uprising. And so it involved some really, really terrible subject matter, but it was absolutely incredible. Tushar, you ask if I work with projections. I am terrible with projections. I'm really, really bad. I performed a one-woman show that I wrote called Drive With Me, and the person who directed me in that actually used projections and used bits of film and projection to create a multimedia space for this play, Drive With Me, and that was really, I loved it, and I loved having access to that. I'm not particularly good at that side of things, but I love it. It's so great, and I find it very exciting. Sagar, I won a Flutter Cup Award for Innovation in Theatre. Yes. How proud was I? I was so proud. So I don't know, Sagar, if you were here when I started talking at the beginning about my sort of journey, and that I am also an improviser, and have run for many, many years a small improvisation troupe. I started my little improv company in Cape Town in 1993, at the end of 1993. And although it now has a different artistic director and it has a different name, it's now called Improguise, I've been involved with this improvisation company ever since. And I was the first person to bring live performing improv to Cape Town, and that was in 1993, and we've been performing ever since. So the award that I won for Innovation in Theatre was bringing improv and improv theatre to Cape Town, which of course is a huge thrill for me. What's my style of direction? More of a performance-based or more of a production value-based? So that's also such a great question, Vijay. So my style of direction is 100% project-based. So for example, when I'm working with Nikkabi Ninja, we really just went totally to the emotion of the piece, and we tried to see how we could deliver such powerful and uncomfortable subject matter in a way that an audience could feel it but also tolerate it. So, and then often when I'm directing industrial theatre, I'm really looking for the heightened enjoyment style, so that I'm looking for the jokes, I'm looking for the slickness, I'm looking for a lot of really kind of slick production value, so that the audience feels like they're being wowed. And also, I think part of the style of direction is often with industrial theatre is to go very, very physical. And make very, very bold physical choices. What inspired me to do theatre? It's interesting. I've always loved theatre, and I've always loved performing, even from a tiny child. And I was incredibly lucky because my parents literally allowed me to run across the road where there was a drama teacher. And I spent most of my afternoons with my drama teacher, and also spent all school holidays performing in some kind of play that often we would take and perform at orphanages and schools. So I grew up very much in a theatre environment. And then it seemed like the obvious choice to then go to drama school and pursue a career. Look, one of the challenges is, and I think it is an enormous challenge anywhere in the world, but also a lot in South Africa, is that you can't be famous and make money in theatre in South Africa. So industrial theatre for me is such a perfect marriage of my passion and the stuff that I love, and really, I hope this doesn't sound silly, but really being useful. So it is a way for me of theatre to be very, very useful, and that really keeps me excited and keeps me inspired. Astri, you said that theatre should bring about change in the audience. Isn't that the objective with most things we create? Poetry, fiction. Yes, I do think that that's exactly the objective of most things that we create, and I'm very invested in creating that in my writing. But I think that with theatre, what happens is that because it's live and because it occupies a very particular moment in time, what's happening is that your audience is changed in front of the performer's eyes, and it is what the performer does that makes the audience change. So it's really a dynamic relationship. It's really a very special relationship, and I love that about live theatre. I really, really do. I went through a phase, and in fact it still is a phase, where I wrote a couple of one-woman shows. One was called The Rhino Woman, and the other one was called The Return of the Rhino Woman. And my main objective there, they were both kind of ghost stories. But my objective there was for the audience not to know what was truth or what was real. So in the first one, in The Rhino Woman, I set up a scene, a scenario, and then suddenly stopped, and as the actress kind of broke down and kind of segued into telling a story about why I couldn't carry on with the play, and of course that was the actual play and the ghost story. And so I really like challenging an audience in that kind of way. Any South African women in the arts that inspire you? Oh yes. I'm so inspired by so many South African women in the arts. My favorite South African actress is an extraordinary actress called Vaniswa Yiza. She's an absolute powerhouse of an actress, and I'm very, very inspired by her. I'm inspired by a close friend of mine, Ntombi Makuchi, who's also a very, very talented actress, who's actually leaving acting a little bit so that she can go into applied theatre and work in marginalized communities with theatre as a tool. And that's also very, very exciting. Of course, there's the old kind of stalwarts of South African theatre, Sandra Prinsloo, who's just amazing and really, really powerful. And there's a wonderful director, Janice Honeyman, who has for years directed our annual pantomimes. There are actually so many. There really are. There's a fantastic new playwright and screenwriter who literally just blows my mind, Amy Jefter, who's completely amazing. Oh, I'm so happy you asked me about the Deep Red Sea. The Deep Red Sea is really one of my favorite things because it's a prose poem. So it's written in a heightened poetic style, but it is but it's to be performed by one person. And it is a love story, but it's of course a tragic love story. But it's very heightened poetry. It's written in a very particular kind of style, which is poetic. I'm trying to think if I'm going to give you a bit of an example. So, for example, the character says, the woman in the play, the woman who I will be, I can't remember. Unfortunately, I don't have the lines with me. But it's very heightened, it's very poetic, and very sad. Vijay, what was the response of the factory workers when you started doing industrial theatre? The first piece of industrial theatre that I ever did, Vijay, was a piece that we performed in a factory of apple packers. They were packing apples, and really what we were, the theme and the focus of the industrial theatre piece was to improve productivity by making sure that the workplace was tidy, by making sure that people were on time, making sure that all the equipment was well maintained. And that piece was such a fantastic piece because we literally pretended to be, it was a two-hander, and both actors pretended to be workers at a competing factory. And it was a competing factory that had all these problems, and we were able to highlight the problems. And it was filled with humor. So what happened was that because we set it up in a really humorous kind of way, the message was so well delivered and so well received that they didn't ever want us to leave. They wanted us to stay and carry on telling the stories about their competition who were doing things so badly, which I loved. Do I have a favorite classical playwright or playwrights? I'm not sure that I do. I do love Chekhov. I love Chekhov a lot, but interestingly, I've only started understanding Chekhov. For me, Chekhov was always the most popular playwright used when we were at drama school, and I always had this terrible, unsettling feeling that I didn't really ever know what was going on, and it's only really in my much, much, much later years that I understand the sense of unfulfilled, nostalgic, complicated wants that people have in Chekhov, and now I really love them. I love his plays and I love his characters. but I guess that it's also taken me up until now to understand a lot of playwrights who I think young people and young actors often have to deal with these classical plays and don't ever really know what's going on. And I have to confess that I can't manage Shakespeare anymore. I'm suddenly just overwhelmed by not loving Shakespeare. I hope that isn't a rude confession. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved being here, and I love this idea of being a massive theatrical network, and I'm so thrilled to have been invited and to be part of that. I'm really grateful, and it's a wonderful, wonderful honor to have been here. So give grateful thanks to everyone who gave of their time and gave beautiful, insightful questions. It's really been a lovely, lovely thing to spend time here. Thank you so, so much. Oh, Ivan asks what's the difference between corporate theatre and industrial theatre. And the difference between corporate and industrial theatre is money and who your target audience is. Corporate theatre is often for your higher management stratas, or it's to launch a product, and there's often much more money, and it's for a higher tier of audience and a higher tier of engagement. Industrial theatre is really much more on the grassroots, and it's often for your blue collar worker. I hope that answers your question. Good. I hope that's you giving me a thumbs up. Okay, so once again, thank you so, so much for joining me.